Ladies and gentlemen, if I didn't know better, I would think that we were here for the murder trial of Lamont Mark. Maybe Chris Reck, maybe Corian Parks, who's actually found in possession of one of the handguns used at the scene of the crime, it seems. But we're not. We're here for a trial on Terrance Sanders. In my first opening statement, I told you that the prosecution would be accusing him, Mr. Sanders, of being guilty by association with other people who might be closer to the center of that bullseye that the detective talked about. I guess the question is, Mr. Sanders is not guilty, then how did we get here? Because we already know, after watching, seeing all the evidence, there's absolutely no forensic or physical evidence that puts Mr. Sanders at the scene of this shooting, much less possessing, holding, or shooting a gun. And out of the hundreds of people who were surely living there, the only eyewitness, the only one, is the witness who agreed to testify if he got a plea deal. That's the only eyewitness. So let's start with, I guess, what we'll call the elephant in the room, Elijah Parker. Because Elijah Parker sat right there, or an oath to tell the truth, told you he saw Terrance Sanders that building. His brother was shot and killed, and he was shot in the leg. Told you Terrance Sanders was there. And if you believe that, I guess this is pretty easy. The question is, why should you question what Elijah Parker had to say while he was here? That's the most important thing to start looking at. What tells us that relying on his testimony of an eyewitness, with absolutely no other physical or forensic evidence, why that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Because eyewitness testimony typically is the most unreliable kind of proof there is. Eyewitness testimony is subject to motive. It's subject to spite, it's subject to exaggeration, and even at its most innocent level, eyewitness testimony is subject to mistake. So let's start with that. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 of the 5 guns on the table over here can be attributed to either Avion Parker, Elijah Parker, or any other number of the DMC gang members that were allegedly playing video games in an apartment, although even that is in question. Some witnesses said, no, they weren't even there. And 1 gun on the table over here apparently belongs to Corian Parks, and was taken from him when he was pulled out of a vehicle that didn't even have Terrance Sanders in it. Sanders wasn't in the car when that gun was seized. Corian Parks was. What do we know about Elijah Parker's testimony that should make us say, wait a minute, do I convict someone of murder based upon that? Well, you heard from several law enforcement officers who initially responded to the shooting. You heard from 2 TRA paramedics who treated and transported Elijah Parker after he and his brother were shot. And you heard from 2 detectives who either responded down to Lutheran Hospital or tried for months to contact Elijah. And he didn't tell a single one of those people that Terrance Sanders was at the Holy Creek. Not one of them. Not in September, not in October, not in November, not in December. January, 5 months later, January of 2024, he's now accumulated not 1, but 2 illegal gun possession charges. And now he decides he's going to cooperate and come forward if he can get a deal. If he can get a deal, a plea deal, sitting over here on the table as an exhibit. So facing up to 12 years in prison on 2 separate gun charges, he makes a plea deal for probation and tells the police that the person they've already arrested is the right guy. I saw him, he was there. Imagine that. Because by January 30th, he'd already been arrested. In fact, all the way back to September 13th, the very next day, they were trying to find him to serve this DNA. So surely Elijah Parker knows this. Surely it's social media. Everyone knows this. Do we really think if Elijah Parker would have got up on the stand and said, oh, it's John Doe and 3 of his friends that shot at me? You think he's going to get a deal for probation? I don't think so. In this plea deal, who makes a plea deal to testify when they're the victim? Now, we're told in the instructions, and you haven't read them all yet, but there'll be some more later. You don't have to leave your common sense at the door. You've all watched the news. You've all watched the movies, right? You know how this normally works. Somebody makes a plea deal with the government. They're going to testify against one of their buddies or one of their co-conspirators, right? That's what normally happens. You see something in the movie where our imaginary character, Jimmy the Rat, gets busted on some low little crime. He doesn't want to go to prison, so he makes a deal. He's going to cut a deal with the government. He's going to testify against his boss. And now the government's going to go out and going to arrest the boss. And then he's going to come to trial. He's going to testify, and then he's going to avoid prison because he's testified against his boss. But who gives a deal in a criminal case to testify in his own case as the alleged victim? When does that happen? And the person he's testifying about has already been arrested. Well, I hope you're sitting there saying to yourself, is this how it works? The prosecution offer a plea deal to an alleged victim to testify about his own case? Is that the way this normally works? Why else can't you trust what Elijah Parker said? Well, for one reason, there's no details whatsoever. He said something about turning around and seeing Terrance Sanders, and that's all we got. That is it. There were no details about what he was wearing. There was no details about what gun he had. There was no details about shooting, times he shot, where he came from. Elijah Parker testified that he and his brother walked outside, they're listening to music, and they heard gunshots. You just heard the same thing from this other. You had no idea where it's coming from. Gunshots coming from in the dark. He had no idea where they're coming from, and he turned and his brother was already down. Okay, so who shot his brother? Who knows? He doesn't know. Shots are coming from who knows where in the dark, and his brother's already down. He grabs a gun and he fires in the direction of where he thinks shots are coming from. All right? You're not identifying who's shooting you when you need to know where the gunshots are coming from, and you hear them coming from somewhere else, and then your brother's down. He has no idea who shot his brother. He has no idea who shot him. He already testified to that. But then he shoots back, and he runs, and he hides behind a tree. And yet at some point, then he tells you, he looks up and sees Terrance Sanders. And what did he say about Terrance Sanders? Nothing. He doesn't describe his clothes. He doesn't describe the gun that he saw. He doesn't even say if Terrance has a gun in his hand. He simply says he saw Terrance Sanders, who the police had already arrested. And what else is odd about that testimony? Well, if he's close enough to recognize Terrance Sanders in the dark, why didn't Terrance get shot? Or why aren't more people shot? If he's that close. See, some of these things just don't make any sense. What fits the overall facts is that a lot of people didn't see Terrance Sanders there. He had no idea who was shooting him. But he knows the police arrested Terrance Sanders, and now he knows he needs to make a deal, he needs to make a plea deal, he needs to come in here, he needs to say something that helps him. If he doesn't say something that helps him, he's not going to get probation. Elijah says he's blindly shooting out in the direction. He doesn't even know where they're coming from. And then he said somebody gets in a car and he shoots at a car. Well, we already know, and I think Selby actually even showed you the same photos. You should take a look at this exhibit 163. There's hundreds of them up there. You can look at the picture of this parking lot when you get back there. There's a trail of bullet casings that are going 2 blocks away. We're going to see who's firing these bullet casings from 2 blocks away. It's almost completely pitch dark in between the lights. and a trail of bullet casings that take off for 2 blocks as the car is either driving in or driving away. Is it realistic that Elijah actually saw Terrance Sanders, or did he just tell the police what they wanted to hear because he wanted to make a deal? And then what does he do? He picks him up with a photo lineup. That's just plain silly. That's just silly. A photo lineup has evidentiary value when the person you're picking is someone you don't know. Someone comes in and robs a bank, and then you get a suspect, and then you show the bank teller 4 photos of people who the bank teller has no idea who they are, but says, that's the person I recognize that came in and robbed me. There's no value to a photo lineup when you pick somebody out you've known for years. That's silly. Of course he's going to pick Terrance Sanders out of a photo lineup. He knows who he is. He knows that's what he's going to say he saw. But there's no value to that whatsoever. If Elijah Parker's picking a stranger out, that's different, but he's not. He's picking out somebody he knows. There's no evidentiary value to that. Not at all. And he'd already blamed him. He'd already told the police, I turned around and I saw him. Of course. And if Elijah's falsely accusing Terrance of murder, well, then no wonder he wants to punch him when he sees him in jail. If Elijah Parker were credible, he would have told the police who shot his brother the night it happened. If he was credible, he would have willingly told the police who shot him, but that didn't happen. He picked up 2 gun charges and potentially facing 12 years in prison, played the only card he had left, made a deal, got probation, and said he's got Terrance Sanders there. That's not credible. That's just not credible. That's not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not how you convict someone of murder. So other than Elijah Parker's testimony, just saying he saw him, what other evidence is there that Terrance Sanders shot and killed Avion Parker? Because even if Elijah couldn't tell you that, because he didn't know where the shots were coming from, much less who fired them, what evidence do you have that Terrance Sanders killed Avion Parker and shot Elijah Parker? What evidence do we have that he was actually even there? What evidence have you heard? Not the narrative from the state or the detectives, but what evidence have you heard that there is some common scheme or plan to kill anyone? Any of these text messages talk about killing anyone? Any of these text messages talk about killing Avion and Elijah? Is there really a plan or a scheme? No, there's none. There's really none. There's not a shred of physical forensic evidence that Terrance Sanders possessed, much less shot, a gun that killed Avion Parker or Elijah Parker. Zero. There's none. They didn't recover that from him. We know that Avion was shot .223, a round that comes from an assault rifle. We've not heard any evidence whatsoever. Terrance Sanders shot or possessed an assault rifle that night. No DNA, there's no fingerprints on guns. Nothing. No video of him leaving the scene with the gun. He's not even in the rap video they made. I don't make a big deal about this rap video. He's not even in it. He's not even there. The only gun that was found connected to this was found in the possession of Avion Parks, and it was a handgun. And who asked to borrow the car? Chris Recht. Right? He even shows his driver's license. So we know Chris Recht, he's driving the car. He shows his driver's license. He's driving the Chevy Cruze when it left, and he's driving it when it returns. Chris Recht. Who was in the music video in November that allegedly referenced the shooting? Lawn Martin. Not Terrance Sanders. He's not even in the video. Whose phone is in the area of Villa Capri at the time of the shooting? Not Terrance Sanders. There's no map showing his phone there at that time. The government wants you to believe that because Terrance Sanders was in a car with Chris Recht when he drove off and when he came back that he had to have participated in a murder. That's the state's narrative. Again, guilty by association. But is that what the evidence tells you? Does the evidence tell you he was there? What if Terrance Sanders' phone died? He went home to charge it and then came back with Chris Wreck. Is that possible? Sure. That's no more or less possible than the state's narrative that he went and took part in the murder. Of course it's possible. It's their burden to prove where he's at, and there's no evidence whatsoever. He was at Villa Capri at the time of the murder. There was no evidence whatsoever that he touched or shot a firearm. None. We know that Jalen Stacks, he came back with Chris Wreck, right? So Chris drove away, and then the shooting occurred, and Chris drove back. When he left, Jalen Stacks wasn't in the car. When he came back, Jalen Stacks is in the car. Where did he come from? When did he get in the car? I don't know. He's been charged with anything. Is it possible that Mr. Sanders got out of the car and then came back just like Mr. Stacks? Well, anything's possible. Again, the burden is on the state to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Terrance Sanders is present over here at Villa Capri taking part in a murder, not texting about some guys that they don't like. No one's talking about murder. We don't convict someone of murder because they happen to be in a car before and after a murder. We don't even know if that's the same Chevy Cruze that was at Villa Capri. I mean, you see a video, and again, this is the state's narrative. Here's the same car driving south. We don't know that. We can't see the license plate. We don't know any of those things. There's no forensic evidence whatsoever that even suggests the bullet holes in the mirror came from a gun at Villa Capri. There's no testimony about that. Again, that's the state's narrative, but there's no proof of that. That's why we're here at a trial. There's no proof of that. There's a bullet hole in the mirror. We have no idea where that bullet hole came from. They say it wasn't there before. We don't know. Other than Elijah Parker in his plea deal telling you Terrance Sanders was at Villa Capri, there isn't a shred of physical forensic evidence that Terrance Sanders was even there, much less possessing or shooting a firearm or killing anyone. None. Again, Corian Parks, he's in the possession of a firearm that was used there. That's bad for Mr. Parks. Chris Wreck was driving the car when he left. He's driving the car when he came back. It's kind of bad for Mr. Wreck. But they're not on trial. Mr. Sanders is on trial with no gun and no proof he's ever at Villa Capri at the time of the shooting. And Lamont Martin, he seems to be in all the videos. But again, there isn't a shred of physical or forensic evidence that Terrance Sanders possessed or shot a gun at Villa Capri. None. Absent Elijah's testimony, for which he got probation on 2 gun charges, there is no other evidence he was there. And out of hundreds of people that were there, not one other witness said they saw Terrance Sanders there. You shouldn't have to make a deal to get a victim to cooperate in their own case. You shouldn't have to make a deal with a witness to get them to cooperate. You make a deal with co-conspirators. Not the rival gang member who gets out of jail by helping convict a rival gang member and saying, no, that's not how that works, because you have a motive to lie then. You're getting something for it. That's just not credible testimony, ladies and gentlemen. You all took an oath to listen to the evidence, to be fair, to be impartial, to follow the instructions of the court. You've heard some already. There's some more that you're going to hear. You haven't heard all the instructions yet. You've heard some at the beginning. You'll be able to take these with you, review them again. These instructions are the law, ladies and gentlemen. It's your job to follow the law. There's a number of jury instructions you've heard. There's more to come. And they're important. They're important because you just don't go back to the jury room and say, well, what do you think? And take a vote. instructions. And these instructions tell you that the state has the burden of proving the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. Under the law of this state, a person charged with a crime is presumed to be innocent, and this presumption of innocence continues in favor of the defendant throughout each stage of the trial. And you should fit the evidence presented to the presumption that the defendant is innocent if you can reasonably do so. That's what the law is going to tell you. This is the law in Indiana. This will be in the instructions. Trust my report, you get to read it later. If the evidence lends itself to two reasonable interpretations, you must, not may, you must choose the interpretation consistent with the defendant's innocence. If the evidence lends itself to two reasonable interpretations, you must choose the interpretation consistent with the defendant's innocence. Are there two reasonable interpretations? Of course there are. Of course there are. There'll be an instruction that says neither sympathy nor prejudice for or against either witness or the defendant in this case should be allowed to influence whatever verdict you make. I mean, somebody got shot here. But that's not the issue. The issue is whether the state has proved a case beyond a reasonable doubt. And where proof of guilt is by circumstantial evidence only, all the other evidence, not Elijah Parker's, when you take all the rest of the evidence, where proof of guilt is by circumstantial evidence only, it must be so conclusive and points so surely and unerringly to the guilt of the accused as to exclude every reasonable theory of innocence. That would be the instruction to follow. Ladies and gentlemen, these kids aren't all gangsters. They're not all gangsters. They're kids masquerading as gangsters. They're emulating their idols. They're writing rap songs. Someone killed Avian Parker. Someone shot Elijah. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Someone shot and killed Avian Parker with an assault rifle. So let's figure out who had an assault rifle at Philip III and convict them. But you haven't heard any evidence that that person is Terrance Sanders. You haven't. And you haven't heard evidence of this big plan. Right? This isn't Ocean's 11. The police want to cast a net and say these kids are all bad. They're all gangsters. We're going to get them off the street. We'll arrest them all. We're all planning this together. Why? Because they tack up a funeral pamphlet of one of their friends that got shot to death. So they rally around that. And the state, they want you to believe that they're all working in concert. That this is a big plan or a scheme to commit murder. Is that what the evidence over on this table says? That there was a scheme, plan to commit murder? Is that the evidence you heard? Or is that the state's narrative? Because they keep telling a story, but the story isn't evidence. Evidence is what's over here. What did you see? There's no credible evidence that Terrance Sanders was at Philip III at the time of the shooting, much less possessed or fired a rifle that killed Avian Parker. You haven't heard any evidence of a plan or a scheme to commit murder. This isn't Ocean's 11 where everybody's rehearsing this for months and coming up with a plan. There's a couple of text messages of who's over here. Nobody's talking about shooting. No one's talking about killing. There's a bunch of kids making music videos, pretending to be gangsters. And Terrance Sanders isn't even in the video. Who shot and killed Avian Parker? Who knows? How could you? You haven't heard any evidence of that. You certainly haven't heard any evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. You fired an assault rifle. Who was there? Who knows? This isn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt, ladies and gentlemen. It just isn't. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you wasted a week. It's okay with Mr. Sanders. This just isn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I ask you to go back to the jury room and reach the only conclusion that you can based upon the evidence that you've